Welcome to the module on creating application page controls. In this lesson, we will learn how to create and use buttons in Apex. Let's get started. In this video, you will learn how to create and use buttons in Apex.
As you design your application, you can use buttons to direct users to a specific page or a URL, or to post or process information. Buttons can perform different types of actions. A button can submit a page, for example, to save changes to a form page. A button can redirect to either a different page or a custom URL. A button can perform a custom action, for example, if a button's behavior is defined in a dynamic action. When you create reports and forms using wizards, you notice that some buttons such as cancel, save, create, and delete are automatically created. Now, let us quickly review the steps involved in creating a button. First, you view the page to contain the item in the page designer. If necessary, you create a region to contain that item. Right-click the region and select Create Button. The property editor displays the button attributes. Edit the appropriate attributes. Under Behavior, select the action to be performed when this button is clicked. Finally, specify the server-side conditions if any and click Save. Now, let us look at a demo of creating a button. On the screen, you can see a sample application I have created earlier using the projects table. In this video, I'll show you how we can add a Create button to one of the forms in the application to create a new record. Open the form in the page designer. If necessary, create a region to contain the item. We already have a dialog footer containing the buttons, so I will not be adding a new region. Right-click on the region and select Create Button. Alternatively, navigate to the gallery and click on Buttons. Right-click the button and select Add To and select the appropriate location. You can also select the button and drag and drop it into the Layout tab. Once you create a new button, the property editor displays the button attributes. Edit the appropriate attributes. Specify the button name and label. Under Layout Position, select the position to display this button. The available template default positions identify the display position within the page template. Under Appearance, select a button template to define the appearance of the button. Select whether to use the normal or the hot button template when rendering this button. If you select hot, the button is rendered using the template stored in the hot template attribute of a button template. If no value is defined, the regular button template is used. Here, I enable the hot button template. Under Behavior, select the action to be performed when the button is clicked. The available options include Submit Page. Submit the current page with a request value equal to the button name. If you select Redirect to Page in this application, when the button is clicked, it redirects to a page in the current application with optional additional attributes for resetting pagination, setting the request value, clearing cache, and setting item values on the target page. Redirect to a page in a different application. This redirects to a page in a different application with optional additional attributes for resetting pagination, setting the request value, clearing cache, and setting item values on the target page. Redirect to a URL. This redirects to the target URL you specify, defined by dynamic action. It does not submit the page or redirect to another page. Instead, the button's behavior is defined by a dynamic action. Specify the server-side conditions if any, and click Save. Server-side conditions are those conditions that must be met in order for this button to be rendered or processed. In this example, you select item is null for type and select ID for the item. This indicates that only when the value of p5_id is null, the condition is met and the create button appears on the form. Once you complete updating the attributes, don't forget to click Save. Now after you create a button, you can later go ahead and edit its attributes. To edit the attributes of a button, select the button in the rendering pane or in the layout tab. You see that the property editor shows the attributes of that button. You can then edit the button attributes and save the changes. Let me run the form to show you how the create button appears. Remember, we cannot directly run the form page since it is created as a modal dialog. To run this form, let us navigate back to the application homepage and click on Run Application. Here, when I click on the Edit button, it opens the form page we edited earlier. Now, since this record is already existing in the form, you don't see the Create button on the form. Click on Create, and now the Create button appears in the form. This is due to the server-side conditions we set while editing the attributes of the Create button. Now enter the appropriate details and click on Create, and a record will be submitted and the new record appears in this report.
To summarize, in this lesson, you learned how to create and customize a button in an Apex application. I hope you learned something useful. Thank you for watching. Welcome to the module on creating and using dynamic actions. We will begin with understanding what are dynamic actions. My name is Apurva and I am a Senior Product Manager for Oracle Apex. Let's get started. In this video, you will learn the concepts of how to create, use, and debug dynamic actions in Apex.
What are dynamic actions? Dynamic actions provide a way to define complex client-side behavior declaratively without the need for JavaScript. Using the Create Dynamic Action wizard, you specify an action that is performed when a defined set of conditions occur. You can also specify which elements are affected by the action and when and how they are affected. When working with dynamic actions, you should be mindful of the fact that the more dynamic actions you add to a page, the greater your overall page size. This is because the dynamic action framework emits additional code to the client for each dynamic action defined, which then also must be downloaded and executed by the framework in the client. Now let's look at an example. The form page in the example contains a dynamic action called job equals salesman. This dynamic action fires whenever a different job is selected from the job select list and checks if the value is equal to salesman. If it is equal to salesman, the commission and hire date page items are enabled, otherwise they are disabled. It uses two native actions, enable and disable. Basically, this example demonstrates how dynamic actions can be used to control multiple items and disabling items for multiple item types. You need to specify the following while creating a dynamic action: when the action happens with optional conditions, what action or actions are performed, what elements are affected by the action. Let's look at the steps involved in this process. First, you open the page in the Page Designer and click the Dynamic Actions tab in the left pane. Under Dynamic Actions, you right-click on Events and select Create Dynamic Action. In the Property Editor, you edit the following dynamic action attributes. First, you enter a name for the dynamic action and you enter the execution and the sequence. Under the When group, you enter the event details and the selection type. You also must enter the client-side condition, and optionally, you can select the type of condition you want to control the true and false action processing of the dynamic action. Next, define the action that is to be performed if the event evaluates to true or false. Finally, click on Save. What are dynamic action events? When you create a dynamic action, you specify the event that causes the dynamic action to fire. Events are categorized into the following types: browser events, standard browser events, for example, change, click, double click, get focus, and so on. Framework events. Framework events are triggered from within the Apex framework, for example, after refresh, before page submit, and so on. Component events. This is only available when there is a component, either an item, region, or dynamic action available to your application that triggers a custom event. These events are triggered from either native components or plugin components that you have installed in your application. Lastly, custom events. This can be any custom event triggered from your application. The process of implementing a dynamic action involves the following steps. First, you create or use an existing page component, such as item, button, or a region. This component is referenced within the dynamic action, which you will create in the next step. Next, create a dynamic action from the application page that invokes the action. Finally, run your application to test the dynamic action. Debugging dynamic actions in Oracle Apex is slightly different than other debugging because much of the processing done with the dynamic action framework is done on the client, not on the server. To debug dynamic actions, Oracle Apex outputs debug information to the browser's JavaScript console if your browser supports it. For example, Firefox with Firebug installed shows the debug information in its console pane. To debug a dynamic action, ensure that the application containing the dynamic action has debugging enabled. You can refer to the Utilizing Debug Mode section in the Application Builder User's Guide. Run the page containing the dynamic action. Open the browser's JavaScript console. From the Developer toolbar, click Debug.
To summarize, in this lesson, you learned how to create, use, and debug dynamic actions in Apex. I hope you learned something useful. Thank you for watching. Welcome to the module on creating and using dynamic actions. In this lesson, we will learn how to enable and disable a page item using dynamic actions. Let's get started. In this lesson, you will review some examples of creating and using dynamic actions. You will learn how to enable and disable a page item.
We already looked at this example of a dynamic action called job equals salesman in the previous lesson. This dynamic action fires whenever a different job is selected from the job select list and checks if the value is equal to salesman. If it is equal to salesman, the commission and the hire date page items are enabled. Otherwise, they are disabled. Now, let's learn how to create this and put this dynamic action to use. Now I will navigate to the Apex workspace and show you how we create this dynamic action. On the screen, you can see that I have opened the Employee Edit form in the Page Designer. Now, click the Dynamic Actions tab in the left pane. First, we create the dynamic action. To do this, I right-click on Events and select Create Dynamic Action. A new dynamic action is created. The Property Editor displays the dynamic action attributes. First, specify the name for the dynamic action. Under When event, Specify the event that causes the dynamic action to fire. For this demo, we select change. For selection type, select the type of page element or construct to be used to trigger the event. For this example, select items. For items, select p3_job. This means that whenever the p3_job page item changes, the dynamic action is triggered. Now, we need to specify the client-side condition. For type, select item equals value. And since we have already selected item as P3 job, it is automatically selected. Now for value, enter salesman. Define the action that is to be performed if the event evaluates to true or false. Expand the dynamic action tree to view the true or false nodes. Under true, select the action. Edit the action in the property editor. For true action, select the action that triggers when the condition is true. In this example, we select enable. Under affected elements, select items for selection type and then select commission and hire date for items. Now, we created a dynamic action where when the job is equal to salesman, the true action will enable the commission and hire date page items. Now that you have defined the true action, you must define the false action as well. So the false action would be to disable the hire date and commission page items when the job is not equal to salesman. To do so, in the property editor for action, choose disable and under affected elements, for selection type, let it remain items, and for items, choose hire date and commission. That's it. Now you have created the dynamic action. Let us run the page and see how it looks. I have the employee edit form open. Here you can see that the job is analyst and the hire date and commission fields are disabled. Now let us change the job to salesman and immediately the hire date and commission fields become editable and you can change the values of these fields.
To summarize, in this lesson, you learned how to enable and disable a page item using dynamic actions. I hope you learned something useful. Thank you for watching. Welcome to the module on creating and using dynamic actions. In this lesson, we will look at more examples of using dynamic actions. Let's get started. In this video, you will learn how to set a page item using dynamic actions.
The screen shows an example of using a dynamic action called get department information. This fires whenever the department page item changes and invokes an AJAX call that retrieves the location and number of employees information for that selected department from the database. It uses one native action, set value, with a set type of SQL statement. For example, when you select the department as operations, the location of Boston and number of employees equals 0 for that department are displayed. Similarly, when the department is changed to accounting, the location and number of employees values are changed accordingly. Now let's see how we can create this dynamic action in the Apex workspace. Here I have the employee edit form opened in the page designer. Click on the dynamic actions tab in the left pane. Here, to create a new dynamic action, right click on events and select create dynamic action. The dynamic action attributes are displayed in the property editor. Specify the following details. For name, enter get department information. And for when event, specify the event that causes the dynamic action to fire. So in this example, we select change. For selection type, select the type of page element or construct to be used to trigger the event. For items, select the page item when changed should trigger the dynamic action. Select department number. Now define the action that needs to be performed if the event evaluates to true or false. Here expand this dynamic action to view the true or false nodes. Under true, select the action that triggers when the condition is true. Edit the action in the property editor and select set value as the action type. Under settings, for set type, select SQL statement. Then enter the SQL statement. This SQL statement fetches the location and the number of employees for a particular department from the database table. Now for items to submit, select department number. Then under affected elements, let the selection type remain items, and for items, select location and number of employees. To summarize, first we created a dynamic action of event type change, and when the department name changes, we selected a true event of type action set value. This will fetch the location and number of employees for that particular department using the SQL statement, and then assign it to the page items, location and number of employees on the page. Now save and run this form. Here you can see that the department is accounting and location and number of employees are displayed. Now change the department to operations and you see that the location and number of employees are changed accordingly.
To summarize, in this lesson, you learned how to set page items using dynamic actions in Oracle Apex. I hope you learned something useful. Thank you for watching. Welcome to the module on creating and using dynamic actions. In this final lesson of the module, we will see yet another example of using dynamic actions. Let's get started. In this lesson, you will learn how to filter and then refresh a report using dynamic actions.
We are going to implement an example of a page which contains two dynamic actions: filter refresh and reset report. Filter refresh fires when either of the select list values for department or job is changed and refreshes the report via AJAX to show the newly scoped employees. Reset report fires when reset button is pressed, which resets the report via AJAX by clearing the select list and refreshing the report. While filter refresh uses one native action, refresh, Reset report uses two native actions, set value and refresh. Now let's go ahead and create this dynamic action and see it in action. Now we are going to add dynamic actions to this page where selecting a job or a department is going to refresh this report based on the value selected, or clicking on the reset button will refresh the report and reset the filter values. Let's go ahead and click on Edit Page in the Developer toolbar. To create the dynamic action, click on the Dynamic Actions tab in the left pane. Here, right-click on Events and click on Create Dynamic Action. Specify the dynamic action attributes. First, we are going to create the filter refresh dynamic action. So I enter the name as filter refresh. Under when, for event, select change. For selection type, select the type of page element or construct to be used to trigger the event. In this example, we select items. And for items, select job and department. Now, under the dynamic action tree, select the true action and for action, select refresh. Under affected elements, for selection type, select region and select the employees region, which contains the interactive report. Now, let's go ahead and create the second dynamic action to reset the report. Right-click on Events and select Create Dynamic Action. Now in the Property Editor, specify the attributes. For name, I enter Reset Report. Under When, for event, specify the event that causes the dynamic action to fire. In this example, we select click. So that click of the button will trigger this action. And for selection type, select the type of page element or construct to be used to trigger the event. In this example, I select button. And for button, select the reset button we have included in the page. Now, define the action that is to be performed if the event evaluates to true or false. Now expand the dynamic action tree. Under true, select the action that triggers when the condition is true. Edit the action in the property editor. For action, select set value. For set type, ensure static assignment is chosen. And for suppress change event, toggle it to yes. Under affected elements, select the selection type as items. Then select department number and job for items. Under execution, ensure the sequence number is 10. Now this true action ensures that the values entered in the department number and job select lists are reset. Now we need to enter another true action to actually reset the interactive report. Right-click on True and select Create True Action. Now for the second true action, select the type of action as refresh, and under affected elements, the selection type should be region, and for region, select the employees interactive report region. Ensure that under execution, the sequence is 20. That's it. Click on save. To recap what we did, we added two dynamic actions, filter refresh and reset report. For filter refresh, we have one true action called refresh, which refreshes the employee interactive report whenever the job ID or the department name changes. In the second dynamic action, reset report, we added two true actions. One is the set value. In set value, we ensured that we set the values of department and job as null value, and then we refresh the region which contains the employee's interactive report. Let's save and run the page to see it in action. Now I'll go ahead and select job as clerk, and you see that the region is refreshing and the report displays all the employees whose job is clerk. Now I select department as research, and it further refreshes the report to display the employees accordingly. Now to reset the report, I click on the reset button, and as you can see, when I click on reset, the job and department values are reset, and also the employees report is refreshed to display all the values. If you want to try and test the demo that I just showed you, you can download the sample dynamic actions application from the gallery into your Apex workspace and try it out.
To summarize, in this lesson, you saw an example of filtering a report and then refreshing a report using dynamic actions. I hope you learned something useful. Thank you for watching.